Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode, number 72, is Can we determine how much fabric we need to make a scrap quilt? But before we get to that, let's get to my opinion. I saw a YouTube video recently from a channel that I watch all the time, and I like her very much. She made a beautiful quilt, but she had trouble with a square and a square block. And I saw immediately what the problem was. She was trying to make a square and a square block that finished to 8 inches. She cut her center square at 6 inches. I knew immediately that was the issue she had, why her blocks were not coming out correctly. The measurement on the center square for a square and a square blocks, as Deb Tucker would say, is nasty. There are not lines on rulers to get those numbers. That's why, in my opinion, the best way to get an accurate square and a square block is using Deb's rulers. Now she has 3 different ones. The one for this particular block would be her large square and a square. And I've showed this to you before. I use it all the time. So it's a good investment for me. You cut for an 8-inch block. I'm putting paper behind it so you can see the lines. It shows you on here where to cut for each number size. Now let me try to get it turned a little bit so that I can show you. Here is where it says 8 inches finished block, and you come up on it and it tells you to cut your strip 6 1/4 inches. And when you do that and you use the lines on this ruler then to trim your square down to the correct size, it's a number between 6 and 6 1/4. It's about 6 1/16. Most of you are not going to want to use your regular rulers to try to cut 6 1/16, which is why I prefer Deb's methods the best. Now, are there other ways to get there? Yes. You can do foundation paper piecing. Now, I was unable to find online an 8-inch finished block. I'm pretty sure, not positive, that you can print those off of EQ. So if you use EQ, you probably can print foundation paper piecing patterns the right size for an 8-inch finished. Let's say you don't. I just took a regular 8.5 sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and I cut it into an 8.5-inch square. And I drew out the seam allowance all the way around, marked the centers here and here, and drew lines. So that gives you a perfect 8.5 raw edge to raw edge block that finishes to 8 inches. Now, if you measure this, you will see, I don't know if you can see these lines I drew here. I have a line here at 1/4 inch, right here, outside this line. And if you then measure to 1/4 inch out here, like I said, it's 6 1/16. Here is where, can you see that line there? There's a line in between, and that's where a 6-inch block would be. So you can see here that at 6 inches, it would be too small. You need it slightly larger. So this is a solution too. So between Deb Tucker drawing your own foundation paper piece pattern or printing them out on EQ, and if any of you have any other sources for getting 8.5-inch square and a square blocks, drop them in the comments below and I will share it with the viewers. But this can get you accurate blocks and you won't have the problem that this YouTuber had. Now, let's get to the episode. Can we determine how much fabric we need to make a scrap quilt? The short answer, accurately, is no. Approximately, yes. Why did I want to know? Because I have my rule, self-imposed rule. If I cut fabric for a scrap quilt, I'm not allowed to put it back into the scrap bin. So when I started to make these better than crumb blocks, I had this bag totally full, 2.5 gallon Ziploc bag full of 1.5 by 2.5 inch pieces. I decided to weigh it. It weighed 2 3/4 pounds. Now I wasn't worried about the whites. I had a bag of scrap whites and I was going to use what I had till I didn't have any more. Wasn't concerned. If I had a few extra, they can be used in another project. So this bag made this quilt that's set 7 by 9. It made this quilt that you've seen before. This one is set 5 by 7. And you've seen this one before that was set 3 by 5 that any other normal person would have set it 3 by 4, but I wasn't going to put a 3 blocks into my scrap block pile. I decided I wanted to use them. So I made 3 of them. And while I love this quilt, I just couldn't make a 4th. At least not right now. Maybe in the future, but not right now. So I had about 3/4 of a pound left of the scraps. So in rudimentary math, that says that about 1 pound of scraps would make this quilt. I told you this is set 7 by 9. They're 8-inch blocks, so it's 56 by 72. Good, big lap size quilt. But remember that these are small pieces. So if were using bigger pieces, there would be less in the seam allowance. So a pound of scraps of bigger pieces will make a bigger quilt. The smaller pieces, a pound, will make a smaller quilt. But this is a pretty good sized quilt, I thought. So now I've made 3. What am I going to do with the rest? There are so many options. You can see that you could take those pieces and alternate the direction of the seam, or leave them all vertical, or leave them all horizontal, and they could be a row quilt. You could just sew them together, or you could put a sashing in between, or you could just use them as a border. You could also make a pinwheel where you take a color and make them intersect in the center. Now that's going to take more thinking and pulling things that go together, but if you wanted to do that, that option is available to you. What I ultimately decided to do was to make this quilt again, which you have seen before. It's called So Many Strips. It's a pattern from American Patchwork and Quilting. It's April 2019, and it takes 16 of the units. It's 10 of the colors and 6 of the lights, or in my case, in this one, white. If you look here over here, my lights were white, cream, gray, but I'm sticking with all the whites that's what I had in this batch of scraps. And I'm going to make this quilt. And it's really fun to piece, at least to me. And I love the log cabin layout. You can see that here's the block, like that. And you just lay it out in any log cabin layout. I always like the barn raising, but you can do whichever log cabin layout you want to do. And we'll see how far that gets me. But the important thing to know is when you have leftover pieces, there is a use for them. There's something you can do with them. You don't have to put them into the scrap pile. You can use them for a border. You can piece them into the back. You can make another quilt. If you don't have enough blocks, add borders. There's so many options to keep scraps out of the scrap heap. I sound like a broken record, I think. I've said that over the last year several times. At any rate, that's today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, happy sewing.